In the annals of arcade history, few franchises have left a mark quite like Mortal Kombat. Blood-soaked, controversial, and wildly influential, the early games in the series helped define an entire era of fighting games. But when fans talk about the original Mortal Kombat Trilogy, they're often not talking about Mortal Kombat Trilogy, the actual game. Confused? You're not alone. The term trilogy has been used to describe two entirely different things. First, the legendary arcade run of Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3 as well as its upgraded forms, and second, a 1996 title that mashed elements from all of them together under one roof, badly in some cases. So with the Mortal Kombat Legacy collection coming soon, I felt that now would be as good a time as any to cover not only the original Mortal Kombat Trilogy, but the separate game released shortly after that was also called Mortal Kombat Trilogy. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. Let's cover the entire confusing legacy of the early part of this franchise. Yeah! The fighting game genre, a realm of uppercuts, fireballs and glorious chaos. And in a rare moment of clarity, Capcom have finally done something fans have begged for. They've cracked open the vault and unleashed Capcom Fighting Collection 2, a savage bundle of cult classics featuring Capcom vs SNK 2, Power Stone, Rival Schools 2 Project Justice, and so many more. 8 legendary fighters, 1 blood-soaked package. And yes, you can grab it now for 31% off using my links below. Still hungry? Try 74% off Street Fighter 6, complete with Season 1 and 2 passes sliced down the middle, or go all in with Fatal Fury City of the Wolves and Expedition 33, both sitting at a tasty 43% off. Not just that, but you can get up to 90% off of thousands of other titles too, so hit the link, grab some absolute bargains, and let's get back to Mortal Kombat. Today, Mortal Kombat stands as one of the biggest fighting game franchises in the world. It's a global juggernaut, with blockbuster sequels, spin-offs, cartoons, live-action films, and modern entries still landing in the hands of players as recently as, well, right now. It's one of the most iconic series in the genre's entire history, but the path to superstardom, that wasn't quite so flawless. Back in 1992, when the original arcade Mortal Kombat first hit the cabinets, many assumed it was just a brutal response to Street Fighter 2. The two games looked similar at a glance: life bars, special moves, rounds, and with Capcom's Fighter releasing a year earlier, the assumption seemed logical. But here's the twist. Mortal Kombat was already in development before Street Fighter 2 even existed. Sure, it may have taken some inspiration later on, but its real roots go back even further. According to creators Ed Boon and John Tobias, the spark that lit the fire came from a different source entirely. Karate Champ, a 1984 arcade game by Technoster, is widely considered the very first one-on-one martial arts fighter. That game didn't just inspire Mortal Kombat, it also laid the groundwork for the original Street Fighter in 1987 too. Boon and Tobias wanted to modernise Karate Champ of the 90s. Gritty, cinematic, and full of ninjas. Their pitch, a digitised fighting game unlike anything else on the market. Midway, however, wasn't sold. They initially shot it down, believing that one-on-one fighters were too simple, too basic, and frankly, not worth the risk. However, Midway did want to experiment with digitised characters, not just in fighting games. In fact, they were desperate to land a tie-in deal with an upcoming action film, Universal Soldier. Their vision, an arcade spectacle starring none other than Jean-Claude Van Damme, fully digitised as the game's main playable character. It was supposed to be a landmark moment, an interactive Hollywood blockbuster for the arcade scene, but then the deal fell apart. The problem lied with the fact that Van Damme was already deep in negotiations to star in a different video game. And with both that and Universal Soldier's tie-in collapsing into nothing, Midway were left with no Van Damme and no game. That setback, however, became a turning point. The combination of Street Fighter 2's explosion in popularity and the lingering desire to make a digitised martial arts game finally convinced Midway, maybe Boon, and Tobias' Karate Champ inspired concept wasn't so far-fetched after all. Development was soon greenlit, and thus Mortal Kombat was born. They had just 10 months from 1991 into 1992 to make it happen. Using Tobias' own Hi8 video camera, they filmed real actors performing martial arts moves, capturing them frame by frame and converting them into sprites, creating a gritty, ultra-realistic look that stood out from everything else in the arcade. Now here's another twist that might surprise you. Mortal Kombat wasn't originally designed to be particularly violent. According to Tobias, the game's now infamous ultra-violence wasn't part of the initial pitch. It crept in gradually. The game's fatalities, they started life as a response to the dizzy mechanic found in games like Street Fighter 2. Boone hated it. To him, getting stunned mid-match just meant your opponent got a free hit, and you got to stand there like a lemon. So instead they thought, what if we saved that moment of helplessness until after the fight was over? And with that little tweak would evolve into one of the most iconic features in all of gaming history. Now, when it comes to why Mortal Kombat fatalities hit so hard, quite literally the answer lies not just in game design but in cinema history. The brutality behind these finishing moves wasn't pulled from thin air. In fact, you can trace it all the way back to 1970s martial arts films. One of the clearest influences, a 1974 cult classic simply titled The Street Fighter. In fact, Sonny Chiba's character performs a finishing move that shows internal damage with an X-ray effect, a violent little visual gimmick added purely to help the film stand out from the sea of kung fu flicks flooding cinemas at the time. Then there's Fist of the North Star, both the manga and its 1980s anime adaptation, where the protagonist Kenshiro has a signature move that targets pressure points, causing his enemies' heads and bodies to explode like overripe melons. Glorious. These kind of exaggerated, visceral takedowns were a staple in Asian media long before gaming caught up, and they left a lasting impression on Mortal Kombat's creators. Originally, John Tobias only intended for one character to have a finishing move, the final boss, Shang Tsung. The idea was for him to draw a sword and decapitate his opponent, a fitting end for the big bad. But the more the team thought about it, the more they realised, why stop there? Why not give every character a finishing move? Why should bosses have all the fun? And just like that, a genre-defining feature was born. Now, halfway through the game's development, a demo version of Mortal Kombat was ready to show off internally. It only had 6 playable characters, but it was enough to impress Midway's higher-ups so much that they gave the team extra time and extra resources to expand the game even further. With that boost, the team refined the gameplay and added another character to the roster, Sonya Blade, the game's only female fighter, who was added to help diversify what had previously been an all-male cast. By the time the final arcade version was ready, Mortal Kombat looked absolutely stunning for the era, using 8-bit megabytes of graphic data, 64 colours per character, and roughly 300 animation frames each. And as for gameplay, it embraced all the classic fighting game hallmarks we now take for granted: best of 3 rounds, life bars, and brutal one-on-one combat. What was even cooler was that Mortal Kombat didn't just look different from the other fighters of the time, it played different too. The game used an 8-directional joystick and a relatively uncommon 5-button layout, 2 punches, 2 kicks, each split into high and low attacks, and then, unusually, a dedicated block button. That 5th button might not sound revolutionary, but it fundamentally changed how fights played out. In most other games, blocking was something you did by holding back on the joystick, but in Mortal Kombat, holding the block button not only reduced damage from incoming attacks, it also let players absorb hits without being pushed backwards, opening up new chances for precise counterattacks. It made defensive play feel more deliberate and more tactical. And while the game shares basic mechanics like leg sweeps and those iconic uppercuts that launch enemies sky high, where it really stands out is in its special move system. Instead of relying on complex half circles or quarter circle joystick inputs like Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat favoured simpler directional taps followed by a button press. This gave the game a unique rhythm, one that felt snappier, more immediate, and accessible in its own brutal way. That design choice also helped pave the way for one of the genre's most enduring techniques, juggling. Mortal Kombat was one of the first games to let you knock opponents into the air, then chain additional attacks while they were still airborne and helpless. It was flashy, it was satisfying, and it laid the foundation for the combo-heavy fighting games that would follow. Now, as for fatalities, we've already touched on how they evolved narratively, but mechanically, they were just as unique. To perform a fatality, players had to stand at a precise distance from their stunned opponent and input a specific button sequence, often within a tight timed window. There was no on-screen prompts, no tutorials, just whispers and rumours passed between kids at arcades. Every character had their own, and figuring them out became part of the mythos. And between battles, the game even broke things up with bonus minigames like Test Your Might, a button mashing challenge that let players smash blocks, stones, or even diamonds in half for an extra point. And like most fighting games of the era, Mortal Kombat had a plot. Though, let's be honest, it's mostly existed to justify why a Shaolin monk, a thunder god and a Hollywood actor were punching each other's heads off. According to the game's intro, the evil sorcerer Shang Tsung was banished to Earthrealm 500 years ago. With help from the monstrous four-armed champion Goro, he managed to take over the Mortal Kombat tournament. And for the past 5 centuries, Goro has remained undefeated. Now a new generation of warriors must step up and stop Earthrealm from being permanently conquered. Before even inserting the coin, players could cycle through the cast and read short bios for each fighter, a touch that added a bit of intrigue. Beat the game and you'd get a more detailed ending, showing what happened to your chosen character after their victory. And let's be real, that character lineup, absolutely iconic. First up, Liu Kang, the Shaolin monk and Earthrealm's chosen one. A classic martial artist archetype inspired by Bruce Lee, Liu Kang enters the tournament with one goal: defeat Shang Tsung and save the realm. Then there's Sonya Blade, a special forces operative chasing down the international criminal Kano, who conveniently is also in the tournament. You could smell the tension. Then there's Raiden, the literal god of thunder, who joins the fray to protect Earthrealm using divine powers and a snazzy hat. Meanwhile, we get 2 instantly unforgettable ninjas, Sub-Zero, who freezes his enemy solid, and Scorpion, his vengeful yellow-clad rival who's back from the dead after Sub-Zero killed his family. And just in case that wasn't enough colour swapping, midway threw in Reptile, a secret green ninja hidden behind cryptic unlock conditions because 90s kids lived for playground rumours and secret codes. But perhaps the most amusing addition, Johnny Cage, a cocky, egotistical Hollywood actor thrown into the mix for comic relief. Cage was a tongue-in-cheek parody of Jean-Claude Van Damme, a not-so-subtle nod to Universal Soldier's tie-in that never happened, and ironically he became one of the franchise's most enduring stars. And here's a little twist of fate for you. Jean-Claude Van Damme did eventually get his wish. He finally starred in a digitised fighting game, just not the one anyone expected. Instead of Mortal Kombat, Van Damme showed up in Street Fighter, the movie, the game, playing Guile of all people. Yes, the all-American military hero was portrayed by a very Belgian martial arts icon. Back to Mortal Kombat though, like any good fighting game, it had bosses, and none were more memorable or more fearsome than Goro. Half human, half dragon, and rocking 4 massive arms, Goro wasn't just a brute, he was the brute. He couldn't be thrown, he hit like a truck, and he served as a brick wall between the player and the final boss. And unlike the rest of the cast, Goro wasn't made from digitised footage. After all, good luck finding a 4-armed actor at your local casting call. Instead, Goro was brought to life using a physical clay model and stop-motion animations, a technique that felt straight out of old-school monster movies, pre-CGI. The result, a towering, jerky, slightly uncanny behemoth that gave Mortal Kombat one more reason to stand out. And waiting just beyond him was Shang Tsung, the game's ultimate villain, a shape-shifting sorcerer who could transform into any of the playable characters mid-fight, mimicking their moves and keeping players constantly on edge. He was less of a brawler and more of a final exam, a master of deception and chaos. Altogether, Mortal Kombat's blend of digitised visuals, over-the-top violence, clever mechanics, and unforgettable characters made it the game everyone was talking about. It wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. You couldn't escape it. Mortal Kombat cabinets were everywhere. Arcades, pubs, bowling alleys, even the odd kebab shop. If a place had power sockets and a bit of floor space, chances are Mortal Kombat was there, ready to spill some pixelated blood. And despite the controversy, or maybe because of it, people of all ages lined up to play it. What makes all of this even more absurd, and frankly hilarious in hindsight, is that Mortal Kombat was still blatantly marketed to children. Just take a look at this early arcade poster. It's flashy, cartoony, and practically screams kids come play. And if you fast forward a few years to 1995, in the thick of my own childhood, Mortal Kombat had even been turned into a children's cartoon. Yes, really, it aired on the Fox Kids network. You know, the same place you'd watch Power Rangers or Spider-Man. What a time to be alive. We 90s kids were absolutely the target market. Every single kid I knew was obsessed with this game. We adored the characters, we quoted the one-liners, and we thought the fatalities were the funniest, coolest things imaginable. Ripping out someone's spine? Hilarious. Uppercutting them into a pit of spikes? Comedy gold. But of course, not everyone saw it that way. The game's unapologetic gore, combined with its massive popularity among children, caused a full-blown moral panic. Parents, school officials, church groups, you name it, people were outraged. The concern that if kids played violent video games like Mortal Kombat, they turn into miniature psychopaths and start roundhousing their classmates. And it wasn't just pearl-clutching parents, powerful figures in the US government got involved too. Democrat Senator Joseph Lieberman and Herb Kohl spearheaded a campaign to crack down on violent games, pushing for censorship, content regulation, and even the threat of outright bans. By the end of 1992, a formal Senate hearing was underway, the topic whether video games were corrupting Americans' youth. Mortal Kombat was front and centre, joined by other supposed digital death machines like Doom, Lethal Enforcers, and Night Trap. Yes, Night Trap, a full-motion video game where you try to stop burglars from breaking into a house using booby traps. The most scandalous thing in that game? A girl in a nightgown, and some truly awful acting. Honestly, if you compare Night Trap to Home Alone, Kevin McAllister looks like more of a threat to society. Of course, the idea that violent video games create violent people, that's always been pure hyperbole. It's been debunked time and time again, but in fairness, and I do mean this, it's absolutely valid to consider that young children might not be developmentally ready for extreme violence in games or films. Nobody wants traumatized kids running around because they accidentally witnessed a spine rip fatality at age 6. If Mortal Kombat was already a hit in arcades, the iconic Mortal Monday was the moment it went full-blown cultural phenomenon. Launched in September 1993 to promote the game's home console debut, the Mortal Monday campaign was a marketing masterstroke. TV ads featuring school kids sprinting through city streets, screaming "Mortal Kombat" at the top of their lungs, a war cry that echoed through playgrounds across the world. It was loud, chaotic, and gloriously over the top, perfectly capturing the rebellious energy the game represented. This wasn't just a game launch, it was a movement, and just like that, the arcade smash had become a household name. By the end of that year, Mortal Kombat was everywhere, and with the brand new rating system in place, the game finally made its way to home consoles. Both Sega and Nintendo would host the title, but the versions, they were very different beasts. The Super Nintendo version, for example, looked and sounded better than its rivals, sharper visuals, crisper music, but in classic Nintendo fashion, the blood was nowhere to be seen. Instead, punches and kicks caused characters to sweat profusely, as if they were having the world's most intense gym session. The gore was stripped away in favour of family-friendly vibes in line with Nintendo's strict content policies, not because of the rating system. Meanwhile, over on the Mega Drive, Sega leaned into the chaos. Blood and fatalities were fully intact, but only if you knew the cheat code to unlock them. This version was slapped with an MA13 rating by the Video Game Ratings Council, making it one of the first mainstream console games to carry an age warning. The game would eventually see ports to a number of other platforms, but one of the best versions hands down was the Mega CD release. It didn't just feature full arcade-style gameplay and uncensored content right out of the box, it even included the iconic Mortal Monday commercial as part of the intro, alongside enhanced CD audio for that extra edge. This version was so accurate to the original, it was rated MA17, a big step up from the earlier ports. So now that we've looked back on the early history of Mortal Kombat, one thing becomes crystal clear. This game wasn't just a violent novelty, it was a seismic moment for the entire industry. But of course, this was only the beginning, as we would soon get a sequel. Just 1 year after the original took arcades by storm, Midway wanted to return to the arcade with a vengeance. In 1993, Mortal Kombat 2 was ready for release. But how do you follow up on a game that already changed the industry? According to lead programmer Ed Boon, the mission was simple: make everything bigger and better. More characters, more moves, more blood. The goal was to not only evolve the look and feel of the original, but also finally implement all the ideas they simply didn't have time to squeeze into the first game. The biggest challenge? Content. As Boon put it, everything in Mortal Kombat 1 we wanted to double. Unlike the first game, which had quietly built up steam, Mortal Kombat 2 had the weight of fan expectations pressing down hard. This time, everyone was watching. Boon took special care with the game's programming to ensure it played better than ever, while lead designer and artist John Tobias refined the combat system, especially the juggling mechanic, which amusingly had been a happy accident the first time around. Rather than remove it, they fine-tuned it, giving players the ability to chain together their own custom combos, a move that helped further distinguish Mortal Kombat from its biggest rival, Street Fighter. The team also toyed with ambitious new ideas, including a scrap bonus stage where ninjas leapt across the screen like a chaotic kung fu film, with players swinging at them mid-air. It looked wild, but some things, as always, are destined for the cutting room floor. For Ed Boon, working on Mortal Kombat 2 wasn't just a sequel, it was a whirlwind. As he put it, the hysteria of the home versions of Mortal Kombat 1 was literally all around us. The original had sold over 3 million copies across home consoles, and the cultural impact was undeniable. That kind of success doesn't just boost your confidence, it supercharges your work ethic. Boon said the adrenaline rush from all that hype kept them going around the clock, fueling the creation of a game that was not only bigger than the original, but massively more ambitious in every direction. Visually, the sequel was a huge leap forward. While Boone notes that Mortal Kombat 2 had a slightly darker tone than its predecessor, the colour palette was actually far more vibrant. The game boasted richer colour depth, and for the first time in the series, the arcade version featured multiple layers of parallax scrolling, giving stages a sense of depth and atmosphere that was unmatched at the time. And yes, tucked in among all the blood and thunder was a little comic relief too, but we'll soon get to that. Sound designer and composer Dan Fulden also returned for round 2, this time taking advantage of the William DCS sound system, which allowed for clearer, more immersive audio that gave the game its signature punch and spine-ripping crunch. But honestly, all of that was just scratching the surface. From a gameplay standpoint, Mortal Kombat 2 refined everything. Players could now perform crouching punches in addition to high and low kicks, giving more nuance to attacks. Recovery time was sped up, which meant combat flowed faster and combos were easier to chain together. Returning characters were given brand new special moves to distinguish them from their earlier incarnations, helping Mortal Kombat 2 feel like a true evolution, not just a reskin. And speaking of speed, the entire game played twice as fast as the original, a move that likely wasn't coincidental considering Street Fighter 2 Turbo was burning up arcades around the same time. And then of course there was the fatalities. The sequel expanded this signature feature in spectacular fashion, offering not just new fatalities for every fighter, but also stage-specific finishers, where players could impale their opponent on spikes or launch them into acid pits depending on where the fight took place. It wasn't just about finishing the match, it was about doing it with style. But perhaps the most unexpected and most memorable addition to Mortal Kombat 2 wasn't more blood, it was less. Enter the non-lethal finishing moves, babalities and friendships. These gloriously stupid, wonderfully offbeat alternatives let you do things like turn your opponent into a sobbing baby, or offer them a gift, or break into a spontaneous dance instead of ripping their head off. It was absurd, it was hilarious, and as a kid, I absolutely loved it. These comedic finishers brought just the right amount of levity to balance out all of the grim decapitations and acid baths, proving that Mortal Kombat didn't always have to take itself so seriously. On top of all of that, the game doubled down on what mattered most, the characters. The player select screen was upgraded from 7 fighters to 12, a significant bump that helped give Mortal Kombat 2 a much broader identity than its predecessor. Story-wise, the game picked up exactly where the first one left off. After being defeated in Earthrealm's tournament, Shang Tsung begs for mercy from his master Shao Kahn, the supreme ruler of Outworld. To save his own skin, Shang proposes a bold idea: bring the next Mortal Kombat tournament to Outworld itself, where the home field advantage will all but guarantee Earthrealm's defeat. Kahn agrees, and not only does he spare Shang Tsung's life, he restores his youth and fighting ability. Then he sends a formal invitation to Raiden, summoning Earthrealm's warriors to compete once again, this time in a world far more hostile than the last. Victory is crucial. If Earth's fighters lose, Shao Kahn will seize the realm and plunge it into darkness. And to flesh out the narrative even more, an official comic book was released alongside the arcade game, written and illustrated by John Tobias himself. It expanded the story's lore and character motivations, and was available via mail order for fans hungry for deeper context. Of course, no sequel is complete without fresh faces, and Mortal Kombat 2 delivered. One of the most iconic new additions, Baraka, a savage mutant warlord of the Outworld nomadic tribes. With his jagged teeth and retractable arm blades, Baraka wasn't just visually striking, he brought a wild, feral energy to the roster, and he was far from the only newcomer who didn't represent Earthrealm. Speaking of Outworld warriors, Mortal Kombat 2 introduced a whole host of deadly newcomers. Amongst these we have Kitana, a personal assassin of Shao Kahn and arguably one of the most graceful yet deadly characters ever introduced to the series. She's fiercely loyal, or at least she appears to be. Throughout the tournament, there are whispers that she secretly aided Earthrealm's warriors, and that her allegiance to Kahn may not be as ironclad as it seems. Equally memorable is her so-called twin sister, Mileena, a twisted doppelganger with a dark secret. Her mission is to ensure Kitana's loyalty to Shao Kahn. Deep down, Mileena resents her sister. Kahn always favoured Kitana, and that jealousy slowly festers into a venomous obsession. She doesn't just want to serve Kahn, she wants to replace Kitana. From Earthrealm, Jax joins the Freya Special Forces officer on a mission to rescue his missing partner Sonya Blade, who vanished while chasing Kano through Outworld. With his sheer power and no-nonsense attitude, Jax added a much-needed dose of military muscle to the roster. We also meet Kung Lao, a close friend of Liu Kang and a fellow Shaolin monk. But Kung Lao isn't just any warrior, he's a descendant of the legendary Kung Lao who fought Goro 500 years earlier and lost. Now this modern Kung Lao seeks vengeance for his fallen ancestor and the destruction of the Shaolin Temple. For the first time, Shang Tsung is now also a playable character, with his youth restored by Shao Kahn. No longer the frail old sorcerer of the first game, he's faster, stronger and just as deadly, retaining his iconic ability to morph into any other fighter mid-match, keeping players on their toes. But of course, Mortal Kombat 2 didn't just expand the roster, it raised the stakes with two brutal boss fights. First up is Kintaro, Shao Kahn's towering enforcer. Sent by his race to avenge Goro's defeat, Kintaro is a monstrous fire-breathing beast, and the game's penultimate challenge, a true test of endurance and skill. And then there's Shao Kahn himself, the final boss, Emperor of Outworld and the host of a tournament. With his massive terrain, brutal hammer strikes and taunting mid-fight commentary, Kahn was more than just a boss, he was a presence. According to John Tobias, Kahn was inspired by one of the greatest villains in cinema history, Emperor Palpatine. Much like the Dark Lord of the Star Wars universe, Kahn didn't appear in the first game at all. He was a looming force in the background, and in Mortal Kombat 2, he finally steps out of the shadows. Tobias wanted players to feel the same thrill he had when watching The Empire Strikes Back and seeing Palpatine for the first time. That moment when you realise the real puppet master has arrived. While Mortal Kombat 2 brought in a wave of new blood, it did leave out two familiar faces, Sonya Blade and Kano. Neither returned for the sequel, which left some fans scratching their heads, but to make up for it, Midway snuck in three hidden characters, each more mysterious and exciting than the last. First up is Jade, a female ninja dressed in green who would randomly appear before certain fights to drop cryptic clues about how to unlock her. Then we have Noob Saibot, a completely shadowed pitch black ninja with increased speed and Scorpion's iconic spear move. His name, a cheeky reversal of the developers' surnames, Boone and Tobias. Hilariously, in early development, his all-black appearance posed a bit of a design challenge. Staff even joked that he looked like he'd wandered in from a very different kind of game, one involving a lot more leather and chains. And finally, there's Smoke, a grey palette swap of Scorpion who would occasionally appear mid-game, often with a puff of literal smoke, teasing players with cryptic messages. His full reveal was shrouded in mystery, and like the others, he added that perfect playground rumour energy that made Mortal Kombat feel larger than life. These secret characters weren't just fun Easter eggs, they made the arcade experience feel dynamic, secretive and alive. You never quite knew what was going to happen next, and it gave Mortal Kombat 2 an edge no other fighting game had at the time. Behind the scenes, the production was also on a whole new level. While the original game used a humble Hi8 camcorder to capture actors, this time the team upgraded to a $20,000 broadcast quality Sony camera. The success of the first game clearly opened the budget gates wide, and it shows. Initially, the actors were filmed in front of a grey backdrop, with the footage processed frame by frame to remove the background and create the digitised sprites. But as production went on, the team adopted a more efficient technique, filming the actors in front of a blue screen and processing the footage directly into the computer. It was quicker, cleaner and much more accurate. Oh, and here's a weirdly brilliant detail. During motion capture sessions, the actors were regularly sprayed with water. Why? To give them that glistening, sweaty look, making the characters appear like they'd just gone 10 rounds in the Outworld sauna. It's a small touch, but it helped add realism and texture to what was already a much more visually striking sequel. Further polishing went into Mortal Kombat 2's visuals after filming, especially when it came to the characters themselves. In post-production, the team added extra muscle tone and definition to the digitised sprites, giving each fighter that over-the-top comic book physique. According to the developers, this level of detail helped set Mortal Kombat apart from other games using motion capture at the time. It looked more stylised, more heroic and frankly more badass. As with the first game, not every character was built from scratch. The team continued to use palette swap techniques to expand the roster without ballooning production costs. But for bigger characters like Kintaro, a different approach was needed. Like Goro before him, Kintaro was brought to life using stop-motion animation, created from a clay sculpture by John Tobias' friend, Kurt Chirelli. The result? A hulking sub-boss with a terrifying screen presence. While Sonya Blade and Kano were dropped as playable characters, both make blink and you'll miss it cameos chained up in the background of Shao Kahn's arena, like Outworld's most wanted criminals on display. From a marketing perspective, Boone and Tobias believed that the new female ninjas, Katana and Mileena, had stronger appeal than Sonya, especially when competing with the likes of Chun-Li over in Street Fighter. In fact, they originally planned to include another female fighter, based on the real-life kickboxer Kathy Long, but she was cut due to time constraints. Same goes for a male character named Kui Hung. Of course, one of the most iconic additions to Mortal Kombat's mythos was never a fighter at all. During gameplay, when you landed a clean uppercut, a strange man would suddenly pop up in the bottom corner of the screen and shout, that man? Sound designer Dan Forden, who we mentioned earlier. The appearance was completely random and absolutely hilarious. It became one of the most celebrated Easter eggs in video game history, later parodied everywhere, from Robot Chicken to The Simpsons. Soon after the arcade release, the game began making its way to homes across the world, eventually being ported to 9 different platforms, including consoles, handhelds and home computers. Now, we could spend an hour comparing and contrasting each version, but frankly, you've got better things to do. That said, one very important thing to note. In the previous generation, the Super Nintendo version of the original Mortal Kombat was outsold by the Mega Drive version at 3:1 ratio. Why? Because as covered, Nintendo replaced the game's signature gore with sweat. Fatalities were censored, blood was God, and players felt like they'd bought a neutered version of a cultural lightning rod. So when it came time to release Mortal Kombat 2, Nintendo learned their lesson. The Super Nintendo version of the sequel finally included full fatalities and all of the glorious gore, but only in the West. The Japanese version remained censored with green blood for all characters and a bizarre black and white screen effect whenever a fatality was performed. Grim, but in a less satisfying way. As for the critics, Mortal Kombat 2 was a smash hit. Sega Visions praised the game's direction as sheer brilliance, while Nintendo Power didn't even try to hide their enthusiasm, calling it the hottest fighter ever. Across the board, reviewers applauded the visual speed, expanded roster, and fine-tuned gameplay. Tony Brusco of the Daily Gazette summed it up best. The hype around Mortal Kombat 2 was well-deserved, calling it a perfect blend of great graphics, action and violence. And he wasn't wrong, the game was a monster hit. In its opening week alone, Mortal Kombat 2 raked in $50 million in sales. According to Acclaim Entertainment, it was the largest video game launch in history at the time, requiring the coordination of over 65 trucks and 11 jumbo jets to distribute 2.5 million copies to around 15,000 stores. It was everywhere, on shelves, in arcades, on the news, and if the first game stirred the pot, this one knocked it straight off the stove. Naturally, the outraged machine came roaring back to life as well. A writer from the Toledo Blade noted that both games had amassed an army of critics, outraged by the bone-crunching, blood-spurting, limb-ripping violence now showing up in living rooms across America. But this time it wasn't just the usual suspects complaining. Mortal Kombat 2's higher profile meant more people were watching and more people were offended. One such voice was Guy Aoki, president of the Media Action Network for Asian Americans, who publicly accused the game of being racist, arguing that it perpetuated Asian stereotypes and leaned too heavily on the martial arts trope. Acclaim pushed back, stating plainly, this is a fantasy game with all different characters. It wasn't created to foster stereotypes. But it didn't stop there. The game was also labelled sexist by USC professor Marsha Kinder, who claimed that the most violent fatalities were aimed at female characters, and that the female fighters' finishing moves were eroticized. To her, the game wasn't just violent, it was misogynistic. Now, whether you agree or not, this much is clear. Moral outrage and accusations of bigotry weren't invented by modern progressives. People have been hunting for racism, sexism, bigotry and what they call problematic content in media for decades upon decades. The only thing that's really changed is the hashtags. And if the public criticism wasn't enough, the developers also faced legal heat from within. Actors like Daniel Pesina, who portrayed characters like Johnny Cage in Sub-Zero, believed they'd be paid additional royalties if the game sold well. And spoiler alert, the game did definitely sell well, but as it turns out, no official royalty structure had ever been agreed upon. No payouts were made. So in response, Pesina and several other performers sued Midway, Williams, Nintendo of America, Sega of America, and Acclaim Entertainment in 2 separate lawsuits filed in 1996 and 1997 for the unauthorized use of their likenesses in the game's home ports. So not only was Mortal Kombat 2 breaking sales records and driving media hysteria, it was also at the centre of a full-blown legal and cultural firestorm. In the end, Daniel Pesina lost both lawsuits, despite seeking a whopping $10 million for the use of his digitised likeness. The court ruled against him, and in a bit of ironic revenge, Pesina later appeared in a photo shoot promoting Bloodstorm, a Mortal Kombat knockoff dressed as Johnny Cage. Subtle. As for the controversy surrounding the game's content, Ed Boon remained calm throughout. His stance: the outrage was outdated. He stated, "I've always had the position that the rating system was a good idea and should be in place," Boone explained. Once Mortal Kombat 2 came out, there was a rating system. We were an M-rated game, and everybody knew what was in it, so it became almost a non-issue. John Tobias agreed, adding that they were perfectly content with the M for Mature label slapped on the game's packaging, and in the United States, that approach worked. The rating systems did its job, and the noise eventually died down. In the end, all the controversy did was pour fuel on the fire. The outrage, the lawsuits, the censorship. It didn't kill Mortal Kombat 2, it immortalised it. Headlines turned into hype, and moral panic only made the game more appealing to the very audience it supposedly endangered. Every scandal became part of the game's legend, turning it from a violent arcade hit into a full-blown cultural juggernaut. By the time the dust had settled, a third installment wasn't just likely, Mortal Kombat 3 was all but guaranteed. In 1995, the inevitable happened. Mortal Kombat 3 arrived, and it did so with force. This wasn't just a sequel, it was a full-scale evolution. Bigger, bolder, faster, and bloodier. Mortal Kombat 3 took everything the series was known for and cranked it into overdrive. The visuals were sharper, the roster was larger, the combos were deeper, and the tone was even darker. It introduced new mechanics, new characters, and a new urban aesthetic that dragged Mortal Kombat out of the Mystics temples and into the gritty streets. By this point, Mortal Kombat wasn't just a fighting game franchise, it was an unstoppable pop culture phenomenon. During the early planning stages for the game, the development team actually considered making the leap into full 3D graphics, but ultimately decided to stick with the tried and true digitized sprite style that had made the series famous. That said, the game still marked a noticeable shift in tone and presentation. Visually, Mortal Kombat 3 moved away from the mystical East Asian influence of the first two games, instead adopting that grittier, more Western aesthetic. Even the soundtrack followed suit, ditching the traditional Asian motifs for a cold electronic edge. The colour palette was also far more muted, giving the game that darker, almost industrial tone. Characters looked different too. While Mortal Kombat 2 had blended hand-drawn elements with digitised actors, Mortal Kombat 3 fully committed to heavy digitisation, making the cast look sharper and more grounded. Costumes evolved, with classic ninja outfits like Sub-Zero's being swapped out for a more modern tactical gear, and for the first time in the series, 3 cyborg characters joined the roster, hammering home that futuristic cyberpunk vibe, but more on them soon. Even the backgrounds got a technical upgrade. Many were created using pre-rendered 3D graphics, pushing the arcade hardware to new visual heights. This wasn't just another Mortal Kombat, it was a reinvention of the brand's identity. A darker, more technological, more contemporary Mortal Kombat had arrived. One of the most noticeable changes in Mortal Kombat 3 wasn't the stages, the music, or even the gameplay, it was the cast. Several of the series' original actors were suddenly nowhere to be seen, and this wasn't a creative decision, it was the result of royalty disputes. Ho Sung-pak, who had portrayed both Liu Kang and the original Shang Tsung, along with Philip Ahn, Mortal Kombat 2 Shang Tsung, Elizabeth Malecki, Sonya Blade, Caitlin Zimaya, who played Katana, Melina and Jade, and Daniel Pesina, who was practically half the original roster, playing Johnny Cage, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, Reptile Smoke and Noob Saibot, all left midway after disagreements over how their likenesses had been used in the home console ports. No royalties meant no return. In fact, Daniel Pesina had already stirred the pot before Mortal Kombat 3 even launched, by appearing in an advert for a rival fighting game, Bloodstorm. This cheeky move sparked the rumour that he'd been fired by Midway, though in reality he'd already parted ways with them over the dispute. As a result, several characters had to be completely recast for Mortal Kombat 3. Eddie Wong stepped in as Liu Kang, Kerry Hoskins took over as Sonya Blade, and John Turk played both Shang Tsung and the new unmasked Sub-Zero. So while Mortal Kombat 3 introduced a host of new characters, it also came with a dramatic shift behind the scenes, and a clear reminder that even in the world of fighting games, the biggest battles sometimes happen off-screen. When it came to gameplay, Mortal Kombat 3 pushed things even further. One of the biggest additions was the introduction of a brand new run button, paired with its own run meter. This mechanic was designed to address criticism from fans who felt that the previous games gave too much of an advantage to defensive players. Now fighters could close the distance quickly, adding aggression and pace to matches. The meter drained when running forward, there was no running backwards. This is Mortal Kombat, not the Olympics, and also depleted slightly during extended combos. Speaking of combos, Mortal Kombat 3 introduced the now infamous chain combos. or as they were more commonly known as, dialer combos. These were preset button sequences that once started couldn't be interrupted. As soon as the first hit connected, the rest was practically guaranteed, often ending in a powerful uppercut or knockback move that launched the opponent into the air, setting them up for additional juggle combos. To accommodate players of all skill levels, the game also featured a Choose Your Destiny screen during single player mode, allowing players to select their preferred difficulty, a small touch but one that helped make the game more accessible and replayable. And then there was the stage interaction, another first for the franchise. Certain stages allow players to uppercut their opponent through the ceiling, causing both fighters to crash into a brand new stage and continue to fight there. It was a clever touch that broke the linear flow of the usual level cycle. However, if the uppercut resulted in a knockout, no level transition would occur, the body stayed where it fell. These gameplay tweaks and features gave Mortal Kombat 3 a faster, more aggressive edge, rewarding offensive play while still leaving room for strategy and spectacle. It felt like a natural evolution of the formula, with just enough new blood to keep things feeling fresh. When it came to finishing moves, Mortal Kombat 3 didn't just bring back the classics, it expanded on them. All of the iconic enders from Mortal Kombat 2 returned. Fatalities, babalities, and friendships were all present and accounted for. But this time around, players were also given a brand new, wonderfully ridiculous option: animalities. These were exactly what they sounded like. After winning a match, your fighter would transform into an animal and maul the opponent in gloriously over-the-top fashion. Sub-Zero turned into a polar bear, Liu Kang became a dragon. It was violent, surreal, and totally in line with the franchise's taste for absurdity. But pulling off an animality wasn't easy. First, you had to perform a new feature called a Mercy, which restored a sliver of your opponent's health after 2 rounds of victory. If you beat them again after showing them Mercy, then you could unleash the animality. In other words, you had to win, and then choose to let them live, just so you could destroy them in a more humiliating way. Mortal Kombat logic at its finest. The game also introduced 3 new stage fatalities, which could be performed in the Subway, Bell Tower and Pit 3 Arena, each one featuring gruesome environment-specific deaths that once again set Mortal Kombat apart from its more restrained competitors. But where Mortal Kombat 3 really pushed boundaries was in its obsession with secrets and hidden content. Enter the combat codes, 6-symbol codes that players could enter on the versus screen during 2-player matches. These codes could alter gameplay, trigger hidden fights, or just display strange and cryptic messages. They weren't random either. Many were shared through magazines, promotional material, and even arcade pinball machines released by Midway at the time. Yes, real-life pinball machines were being used to leak Mortal Kombat secrets. Peak 90s. And then there was the Ultimate Combat Code, a 10-symbol input entered after the game over screen in single-player mode. If entered correctly, it unlocked a hidden playable character, Robot Smoke. This could be done by a player, or more likely by a cheeky arcade operator who knew how to access the cabinet's diagnostic menu. That is, unless you were playing version 2.1, where the only way in was via the infamous EJB menu, a secret developer screen hidden behind a specific set of inputs. All of these secrets, codes, and mysteries only added to the mythos. They made Mortal Kombat 3 feel alive, unpredictable, and full of potential. Every time you played, you wondered, is there more hidden here? And with Mortal Kombat, the answer was almost always yes. By the time of Mortal Kombat 3, Shao Kahn was tired of losing after being defeated by Liu Kang in the Outworld tournament. The evil emperor decided it was time to play his trump card, enacting a 10,000-year-old plan that had been lying in wait. The scheme? He would have his shadow priests, led by Shang Tsung, resurrect his long-dead queen Sindel, who had died young under mysterious circumstances. But instead of reviving her in Outworld, her reincarnation would take place in Earthrealm. This loophole would allow Shao Kahn to physically cross into Earthrealm without breaking the rules of Mortal Kombat, using Sindel's presence as a bridge between worlds. And the moment she returned, all hell broke loose. Kahn reached across the dimensional veil and pulled Sindel back into his control, and in doing so began merging Earthrealm with Outworld. The result was devastating. Billions of souls were ripped from their bodies, leaving Earth a broken wasteland under siege. Only a few were spared, protected by Raiden, Earthrealm's guardian. But Raiden could only do so much. His power didn't extend into the Outworld, and now that Earth was potentially merged with it, he was powerless to directly intervene. Instead, he turned to Earth's surviving warriors, fighters strong enough to resist Shao Kahn's influence and face his wrath head-on. To wipe out the last of humanity, Kahn deployed extermination squads, hell-bent on hunting down and eliminating the survivors one by one. Raiden could protect their souls, but not their bodies. The warriors would have to fend for themselves. Only by defeating Shao Kahn could Earthrealm be restored. Out of the host of newcomers joining the roster, we have Cyrax, portrayed by Sal DeVita. He is one of 3 cybernetically enhanced assassins sent by the Lin Kuei clan. Outfitted in bright yellow armor and loaded with internal weapon systems, Cyrax was designed to hunt and eliminate rogue warriors, including his former ally Sub-Zero. He may be a machine, but what little humanity remains inside him is beneath buried layers of metal and code. Then there's Cabal, played by Richard Divizio, a former member of the Black Dragon crime syndicate who now walks a different path. Horribly scarred and kept alive by a breathing apparatus, Cabal fights using dual hook swords and lightning speed. Once a villain, now something more ambiguous, Cabal walks the line between anti-hero and survivor. Nightwolf, also portrayed by Sal DeVita, is a Native American shaman and spiritual warrior. With the power to summon ethereal weapons and channel energy from the Great Spirit, Nightwolf serves as one of Earthrealm's most notable defenders. Sector, the red-clad predecessor to Cyrax, is the first of the Lin Kuei's cybernetic experiments, ruthless, emotionless and utterly loyal to his programming. Sector is the embodiment of the clan's vision for the future, a perfect killing machine. He's a walking death engine armed with missiles and flamethrowers and will stop at nothing to eliminate his targets. Sindel, mentioned earlier, portrayed by Leah Montelongo, is the resurrected queen of Edenia and the key to Shao Kahn's invasion of Earthrealm. Though originally named Musasha in early development, the final version of Sindel is a gothic vision of power and tragedy, silver-haired, screaming like a banshee and wielding supernatural flight. Though she once ruled peacefully, her revival under Kahn's control turns her into a deadly puppet, but behind the malice there's a glimmer of the queen she once was. Shiva, created using stop-motion animation, is a proud and powerful member of the Shokan race, the same four-armed species as Goro and Kintaro. Unlike her male counterparts, Shiva brings a more calculating, loyal presence to the battlefield. With ground pounds and brutal grabs, Shiva was the first playable female Shokan in the series, and she made sure you remembered it. Striker, played by Michael O'Brien, is by far the most grounded fighter in Mortal Kombat 3, a riot control officer equipped with grenades, batons and a baseball cap that screams early 90s mall cop. Striker is either the most underrated fighter in the franchise, or is the most hilariously out of place, but looks aside, he means business. Mortal Kombat 3 didn't just arrive, it launched with impact, backed by what would later be recognised by the Guinness World Records Gamers Edition as the largest promotional campaign for a video game at the time. Mortal Kombat 3 hit North American arcades in April of 1995 like a thunderclap. Expectations were sky high, and Midway made sure everyone knew about it. Naturally, the arcade version was just the beginning. The game was swiftly ported to home consoles, specifically the Genesis, Super Nintendo and PlayStation. According to Ed Boon himself, the PlayStation version was nearly arcade perfect, preserving the speed, visuals and sound with remarkable accuracy. But there was a catch. Sony had struck a timed exclusivity deal with Midway, reportedly worth $12 million, which gave Sony Computer Entertainment the exclusive rights to release Mortal Kombat 3 on 32-bit platforms until the end of the first quarter of 1996. This meant that versions for the Sega Saturn, 3DO and Atari Jaguar were all delayed, with plans to release them sometime in the second quarter of 96. Carrying on the tradition of simultaneous home launches from previous entries, Midway announced that the Genesis, Super NES, Game Boy and Game Gear versions of Mortal Kombat 3 would hit shelves on Mortal Friday on October 13, 1995. It was an ambitious multi-platform push, but not all versions made it on time. The Game Gear version in fact never released in North America at all. Interestingly, publishing duties also shifted during this time. While Acclaim had handled home versions of the earlier games in North America, Williams Entertainment took over the 16-bit and portable releases of Mortal Kombat 3 domestically, though Acclaim still handled publishing in Europe. With that many moving parts, deals and delays, the release of Mortal Kombat 3 wasn't just a game launch, it was a strategic media event carefully orchestrated to dominate arcades, living rooms and headlines alike. According to Replay magazine, it was the most popular arcade game in the United States by May of 1995. And that wasn't just hype, it was backed by cold, hard numbers. Mortal Kombat 3 was one of only 3 games to receive the American Amusement Machines Association Diamond Award for that year, an honour based solely on sales performance. Even more impressively, Mortal Kombat 3 was the highest grossing arcade cabinet conversion kit of 1995 in the US. That meant arcade operators weren't just upgrading their cabinets, they were making serious money from them. Home sales were equally explosive. Williams Entertainment, which handled the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions, reported 250,000 copies sold in the first weekend alone. That figure instantly placed the game among the best-selling titles of 1995. And it didn't stop there. By November 23rd, the Super Nintendo version alone had sold over 1 million units, eventually going on to become the best-selling home video game of the year in the United States. Critics and retailers alike took notice. Mortal Kombat 3 was even nominated for the Video Software Dealers Association's Video Game of the Year award for '95. It ultimately lost to Donkey Kong Country 2, but just being in that conversation proved how far Mortal Kombat 3 had pushed the series. It wasn't just a sequel, it was a juggernaut. Despite the commercial explosion surrounding Mortal Kombat 3, not everything about its release was met with applause. There was some backlash from fans regarding certain elements of the game, and they made their opinions loud and clear. One of the biggest complaints was the absence of series favourites like Scorpion and Katana, which many found baffling. Their replacements, let's just say Striker the Riot Cop in cargo trousers, didn't exactly win hearts. Critics and players alike scoffed at the inclusion of less charismatic newcomers and lamented the absence of beloved veterans. The new combo system, complete with dialer combos, also divided opinions. Some praised its speed, while others accused it of being clunky, restrictive, and too far removed from the raw, scrappy charm of earlier entries. Animalities, one of the game's flashiest new features, were often dismissed as ridiculous, and even the run mechanic drew criticism for disrupting the balance that fans had come to expect. Yet despite the murmurs of dissatisfaction, the game still scored big with reviewers upon launch. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave the PlayStation port Game of the Month, and even IGN, while scathing about the design direction, admitted the port itself was a technical marvel. But not all critics loved it. Some pointed out a growing sense of staleness. GamePro declared it was neither as fresh as Tekken nor as deep as Street Fighter, while Next Generation stated the franchise was in dire need of reworking. Mortal Kombat 3 was clearly the most refined and mechanically layered entry in the series to date. Yet with refinement came a creeping sense of fatigue. The shock factor that had once defined Mortal Kombat was starting to wear thin for some, and the once rebellious upstart was beginning to look like it may very well struggle to keep pace in a rapidly evolving genre in the future. But it wasn't the end of the classic era quite yet. With Mortal Kombat 3 receiving a mixed reception and criticism directed at missing fan favourites, Midway quickly went back to the drawing board. The result was Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, a refined, updated release in arcades later that same year in '95. While not a full sequel, it functioned as something of a director's cut, addressing the roster complaints, tightening gameplay mechanics, and reasserting Mortal Kombat's place at the top of a fighting game food chain. First and foremost, the character roster was dramatically improved. Missing icons like Scorpion, Katana and Jade were brought back into the fold, alongside new additions such as Ermac, Human Smoke and Rain. This gave fans over 20 characters to choose from, a far cry from the gutted lineup of Mortal Kombat 3. Gameplay refinements came thick and fast. While the controversial dialer combo system remained, it had been better balanced this time around. Some of the more overpowered moves were toned down, and characters could now launch air combos with greater fluidity. New gameplay modes were also introduced to spice things up. The 2-on-2 endurance-style battles and a tournament mode for up to 8 players brought extra replayability to the arcade cabinets. The popular uppercut stage transitions returned as well, allowing players to smash each other into new arenas mid-match with brutal flair. The visual presentation also received a polish. Several new stages were added, including the desert, the waterfront and the ominous graveyard, while existing stages from Mortal Kombat 3 made a return. Although the game still used the same digitised sprite-based visuals, tweaks were made to make transitions smoother and hit detection more responsive. A new Shao Kahn's Lost Treasures reward screen was added to the end of the arcade ladder playthroughs, offering a fun mix of jokes, secret battles and additional content for the most dedicated players. The arcade release was followed by a variety of home console ports. The Sega Saturn version was widely praised for its faithfulness to the arcade original, while the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions, though limited by hardware, still managed to provide a solid Mortal Kombat experience for fans. Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 didn't reinvent the wheel, but it perfected the blueprint Midway had been building since 1992. For many, it remains the definitive version of the original Mortal Kombat Trilogy, a game that addressed fan demands, refined the combat to its sharpest form yet, and provided the most robust and complete Mortal Kombat experience of the era. So now we have talked about the original Mortal Kombat Trilogy, let's talk about what followed it. A game titled Mortal Kombat Trilogy. Mortal Kombat Trilogy was released in 1996, and although featuring an all-new title, it is technically the second and final major revision of the Mortal Kombat 3 formula, following on from the refinements of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. Available on PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn and PC, with smaller ports arriving on the Gamecom and the R-Zone of all things, this version attempted to be the ultimate compilation of the original Mortal Kombat era. building on the mechanics and story frameworks of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. Trilogy would bring back even more characters and stages from the earlier Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat 2 games, essentially functioning as a greatest hits package for fans of the series. The game's soundtrack was a patchwork of music from Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 3, with many tracks preserved, particularly in the CD-ROM versions of the game. However, players quickly noticed that several of the songs didn't match their intended arenas, as they had in the original arcade releases. Surprisingly, none of the music from the original Mortal Kombat was used at all. The CD-ROM editions used Red Book audio directly from the disc, providing high-quality CD sound. That said, the tracks were noticeably slowed down in both tempo and pitch. This was due to the fact that when converting the Mortal Kombat 3 tracks to CD audio, they were down-sampled without properly adjusting the playback rate to preserve the original speed, resulting in a subtly warped listening experience that audiophiles and longtime fans were quick to notice. Mortal Kombat Trilogy introduced a number of new mechanics and refinements to the established formula, the most notable being the addition of the Aggressor Bar. This meter gradually fills during battle, filling twice as fast if your opponent is blocking, and once full, temporarily boosts your character's movement speed and damage output. It was an attempt to reward aggressive playstyles and further differentiate Trilogy from its predecessors. Several characters received new special moves, often using previously unused animations or simple alterations of existing ones. However, not every returning move made it through unscathed. Sub-Zero's iconic spine rip fatality was included, but completely censored, a workaround presumably done to avoid reanimating the gory finish from scratch. Mortal Kombat Trilogy also debuted the Brutality, a savage new finisher that sees the player unleash a rapid-fire combo barrage until the opponent literally explodes. This over-the-top addition would later be retrofitted into the 16-bit ports of Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3, which were released around the same time. While nearly all the previous stage fatalities returned, the Pit 2 was conspicuously absent, likely for the same reasons as the censored spine rip. In terms of environments, Trilogy pulled from across the franchise, offering players access to most stages from Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3, and Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. However, only 4 classic arenas from the original Mortal Kombat made the cut. Despite the game's aim to be a comprehensive compilation, certain omissions were seemingly unavoidable. Alongside the returning Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 roster, including previously hidden and console-exclusive characters, Mortal Kombat Trilogy further expanded the playable lineup by reintroducing Raiden and Baraka, both appearing exactly as they did in Mortal Kombat 2, with one key update: brand new running animations designed specifically for Trilogy. One notable return was Johnny Cage, absent from Mortal Kombat 3 due to Daniel Bacina's legal dispute with Midway, who now re-entered the fight portrayed by a new actor, Chris Alexander. Interestingly, Johnny Cage retained most of his Mortal Kombat 2 moveset, with the exception of his infamous Split Punch. This move was omitted entirely since characters from Mortal Kombat 3 and Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 lacked animation frames for being struck in the groin. Despite this, Cage became something of a Trilogy exclusive, being the only newly introduced fighter not seen in Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. Boss characters also received a surprising promotion. Goro, Kintaro, Motaro, and Shao Kahn were fully playable right from the start in most versions of the game, a first for the series. However, the Nintendo 64 version restricted this feature slightly, offering only Motaro and Shao Kahn as unlockables via a cheat menu. Additionally, players on PlayStation, PC and Saturn could access alternate versions of Jax, Kung Lao, Kano and Raiden from earlier entries, though Raiden, Jax and Baraka lacked proper run cycles. Instead, they simply sped up their standard walk animation, a rather janky compromise for modernisation. Mortal Kombat Trilogy also introduced 2 new secret characters, depending on the platform. Most versions featured Chameleon, a semi-transparent Mount Ninja whose moves and appearance cycled between all the classic pilot-swapped warriors. Chameleon was unlocked using a hidden button combo. Meanwhile, the Nintendo 64 version swapped him out for Chameleon with a K, a translucent female ninja who shifted between Katana, Melina and Jade mid-fight. Mortal Kombat Trilogy received a wide range of critical responses, with reception often hinging on the specific platform in question. GamePro, for example, praised the enormous roster, the inclusion of the aggressor mechanic, and the application of new features to old characters. While they noted the occasional slowdown and muted music, they ultimately concluded that the game delivered the brutal fan service people expected. Despite its divisive critical reception, Mortal Kombat Trilogy saw commercial success, particularly on the Nintendo 64, where it launched during a drought of competitive titles. Mortal Kombat Trilogy stands today as both a celebration and a swan song for the original era of the franchise. It was the last major entry to use digitized actors and 2D sprite-based combat, before the series made the leap to 3D, and for many fans it represented the ultimate culmination of everything Mortal Kombat had been up to that point. Every character, almost every stage, and an overwhelming glut of content crammed into one chaotic package. While its balance was questionable and its gameplay arguably bloated, Trilogy carved out a legacy as the definitive what-if dream match. A messy but beloved love letter to the early years of combat. For better or worse, it closed the book on the classic formula, giving players one last brutal encore before the franchise evolved into something new. If you love old school fighters, don't forget you can grab Capcom Fighting Collection 2 right now for 31% off using my link below. Still hungry? Try 74% off Street Fighter 6 complete with Season 1 and 2 passes carved up like Thanksgiving turkey. Or go all in with Fatal Fury City of Dwarves and Expedition 33, both sitting at a mouth-watering 43% off. Not just that, you can get up to 90% off thousands of other titles too. So hit the link, grab some absolute bargains, and remember, the only real fatality is paying full price. Cheerio!